Hello, everyone. Welcome to the City Council's workshop to discuss Knoxville's housing strategies. In just a minute, we'll do a roll call vote, but first we'll follow Councilwoman Helsley in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand as you're able.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Hopper, will you call roll?
Councilwoman Fugit. Push your button. Oh, is it? All right, I'm here. There it is. Councilwoman Helsley. Here. Councilwoman McKenzie. Councilwoman Parker.
Here.
Councilwoman Ryder.
Here, mine's not working either.
Okay. Councilwoman.
This could be a really short.
Sorry.
workshop.
Councilwoman Roberto.
Here.
Councilwoman Singh.
Here.
Vice Mayor Smith.
Here.
Councilman Thomas.
All right, off to a good start. All right, to kick us off, Mayor Kincannon's here. She'd like to give us an introduction, and we'll follow her remarks with a presentation by multiple members of the administration and other supporting agency staff. We'll try to be patient and hold our questions to the end, but if one just can't wait, feel free to jump in. But over to you, Mayor Kincannon.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Smith. Good evening, council members. It's a pleasure to be here before you this evening to address this important topic that we've been working on and you all have been supporting, and the whole community cares a lot about this issue. So, as you all know, Knoxville is vibrant and growing. We are fortunate to live in a city that people want to move to, that has a bright and promising future. However, growth can be positive, but it also presents some challenges. So as you agree, I want to welcome our new-coming people to Knoxville, while also at the same time making sure our current Knoxville residents don't get squeezed out of their homes. So how do we do this? Well, first, we recognize that the housing crisis is real. You will hear tonight that we need to build between 1,200 and 1,600 new homes per year just to keep up with the projected growth in our city. So simply put, we must do more to make sure Knoxville is attainable and affordable for all. And that's really important, not just for some people at a certain income level, but for everybody at all income levels. And you all are well aware of this. In 2021, with the support of this council, we launched the Affordable Housing Fund, which committed via ordinance a minimum of $5 million a year for 10 years towards affordable housing. And as you all know, I'm very pleased that while $5 million was a good floor, we have exceeded that goal every year. And in my 4 years and counting as mayor, we have invested more than $40 million towards affordable housing in Knoxville. So that is really positive and much more than the floor that we committed to. The other good news is that $40 million has leveraged over $600 million in private investments, resulting in the creation of thousands of new homes, including 2,300 affordable homes. So we have made substantial progress, but more is needed. And tonight, we're going to walk you through an update of our strategic plan and talk about innovative solutions we are working on. You will hear about our housing ecosystem, our vision, our priorities, and how we are using data to support and inform our strategic decisions. So let me be clear, we are addressing the housing crisis, and we will continue to use every available lever to make housing attainable for everyone in Knoxville. So now, Vice Mayor, I'm going to conclude my remarks and then invite when you're ready, Kevin Dubose, our Director of Housing and Neighbor Development, is going to lead council off on this important presentation. And appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you, Mayor. Over to you, Director DuBose.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Smith and Council, for the opportunity to talk to you about what we're doing to address the housing need. Before I get started, I'd like to recognize all of the members on my team, the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department. If you would just wave your hands so council knows who you are. I'd like to, secondly, really just describe the challenge. You know, when we first started looking at the housing strategy, what's been done, what we need to do moving forward, I strictly saw it as an affordable housing issue. And I've since learned that there are two groups that we really need to be concerned about. One, traditionally dependent on subsidized housing, and another group that are the working poor, almost, I hate to use that word, but working but unable to earn enough to keep up with the rising rents. Next slide. Affordable housing has a connotation. It traditionally means housing for those earning 60% of the AMI and below. Workforce housing is that term that usually describes those earning between 60% and 100% of the AMI. And attainable housing is sort of the new language that we're using to describe the needs of both, okay? Next slide. Why attainable housing? Well, for one, is it addresses the root cause of the problem. You know, the issue is growth related, and so it keeps the focus on that. We need to broaden our levers, so to speak. There are protections and incentives and programs available to low and moderate income people and to create units for that group, but other levers are needed for those who need workforce housing. Next step. Just for reference, what are we talking about? What does that mean? So a low-income individual is earning 48.4 or below, okay? And if that income is $30,250, they're considered very low. If it's $18,150, HUD defines that as extremely low income. For a family of four, that number is 69.1, 43,200, and 30,000. And it's based on our area median. So in Knox County, that is 91,700, okay? For a family of four, that's considered, you know, the absolute middle. And so we are concerned for those making around the area median, you know, pretty much below 100,000. We need to have housing opportunities for everyone, including both groups. Next slide. Here is a graph that just shows you the situation we're dealing with. Plainly speaking, the housing development has not kept pace with our housing development growth. So we have traditionally been a community that has grown very slowly. In some decades, we've lost population. The period between 1990 and 2005, we only grew by 1,800 persons total in 15 years. We grew by 2,787 in 3 years, between 20 and 22. Next slide. And then last year, we had our single biggest growth year in recent history, 3,241 persons added to our city. At the same time as growth increased, we experienced a slowdown in development caused by the Great Recession, where commercial capital was unavailable or very limited. In 2011, only 71 new units came online, apartment units, not 71 complexes, but actually 71 individual apartments. And then in 2012, sort of a 30-year low there is only 111 new homes were built. Next slide. Between 2011 and 2022, we've averaged 884 units per year. And majority of that has been multifamily. Only 177 on average have been single family. All right, next slide. Another issue is how much folks are paying for their homes, for their paying in rent. And HUD defines as a term called cost burden, which means that an individual or the family pays greater than 30% of their income for housing. All right, 22,804 people are considered cost burden in our city. That is the size of Farragut, almost, the population. And 10,927 individuals are pay more than 50% of their income for housing. It's the size of Alcoa or Clinton, just to put it in perspective. So not only is it an availability issue, but it's a cost of housing issue as well. Next slide. This slide shows housing units and who can afford them based on their rent. And you can see there, we have a gap in the very low income area. If you're earning less than $20,000, there is a gap there in terms of the available units that are affordable for that group. There's also a gap for those earning more than $50,000. All right, kind of speaks to the issue of why we need housing options for all. And in the middle, you see that there's a surplus, but everyone is competing for that same housing. So if you're making below 20, you're renting up. You're paying in that range that you most likely can't afford. If you're earning below 50,000, then you're competing with, those who need housing the very most. Next slide. So HUD restricts the amount of rent that can be charged for those receiving their assistance. And I wanted to give you a picture of what that was. So for one bedroom, it's around $1,000. For two bedroom, $1,221. Three bedroom, $1,578. And then four bedroom, $1,833. Those limits are called fair market rents. So we don't have rent control in our city, but several thousand units are restricted by these FMR. Next slide. It's becoming even more difficult to purchase a home. In Knox County, you need about an income of about $121,000 to afford a newly constructed home. Our situation is such where, our rents are rising, but not at the level of the national average. We're still more affordable than our neighboring cities, Chattanooga, Asheville, and Nashville, but that doesn't diminish the need here. The housing crisis is very real as we speak. So what do we have available to us to solve the issue, to produce production? So traditionally, we've had tools that were really mostly federal. We have a couple of federal programs that we receive every year. We're an entitlement city, meaning that based on our population and our poverty, we receive a community development block grant, and that level is about $2 million currently. And then in the early 90s, there was a spinoff from CDBG, and the Home Investment Partnership was created. And with home, it's only used for housing, and you must produce a unit. And so those have been the two tools that we have really been using to meet the housing needs in our city. Then the Affordable Housing Fund, which the mayor described, was added. And then also we've been leveraging through our public-private partnerships, which we'll tell you more about that. And then we've been able to turn vacant, blighted, and abandoned properties into home ownership opportunities and affordable housing and rental and market rate housing as well through our Homemakers program. Next slide. Some recent accomplishments. We've partnered, as you know, on several levels. The Affordable Housing Fund was established in 2021, which committed $50 million for this issue. In response to requests from the NAACP, we've created a construction career ladder that seeks to produce more workers in the construction industry to meet a shortage. And that's going very well. I just heard there's some new data to say that that's working. And then last year formed the Joint Office on Housing Stability. On the development end, transformative work to remake traditional public housing. First Creek in Austin was launched and has progressed, and now transforming Western. And we're building several permanent supportive housing unit developments. And we're going to produce more units than ever before for those who are experiencing housing instability. Next slide. This graphic is pretty important because it kind of shows where we've been and where we're going. The orange line is that community development block grant, okay? And the blue line is the home investment partnership. The green is local homeless general funds. And as you can see from the progression in years, that those funds, those federal funds had decreased except for during the pandemic when we had a big influx of cash for those programs. But also you'll notice starting in 2016 and 17, the funding increased, local funding for affordable housing. First through the Affordable Rental Development Program or the Affordable Rental Development Fund, and then through the Affordable Housing Fund. We're at the point now where $9 million of local money on average is supporting our work. Next slide. We do this through a slew of partners, a bunch of organizations that work with us on housing stability, minor home repairs, ensuring that lead is removed from unsafe housing, accessible ramps are built, and those deficiencies are met so that housing is better accessible and visitable. We have community housing development organizations, which are an important group. They receive a set aside from that home investment partnership. And so for many years, we have been investing in those organizations, and those organizations are producing units and providing home ownership opportunities, as well as doing some rental development as well. Then we have some nonprofit developers that are producing housing. Some of them are skilled with the low-income housing tax credits. It's not all private developers, but some nonprofit developers. And then we have some private developers that have really moved the needle and partnered with us to address our gap. Next slide. Here's some of the results of our work. Just the federal funds since 2019, we've invested about $8.4 million in housing, resulting in 488 units. Those are rental as well as some owner-occupied units. We spend money on homeowners who have code deficiencies and that may not have another way to repair their homes. And then working through those community housing development organizations through the set-aside, been able to produce a bunch of units through that lever as well. Next slide. And exploding, as the mayor mentioned, through the local monies that you all have contributed, we have been able to produce 2,377, and our 44 million has leveraged $665 million. And let me point out that these are units completed, approved, and also under construction. So some of those units, had started prior to 2019, but were built during 2019. Next slide. So far, we have returned $15 for every dollar investment. It's pretty impressive. I heard the mayor of Nashville speak a few months ago at a conference, and he mentioned that their rate of investment was 1 to 8. And so you want about a 1 to 8 to 1 to 9 leverage of your public monies. We're far exceeding that, and we feel like we have a very good story to tell moving forward to leverage other partners in this work. Next slide. All right, moving forward, our challenge. We're going to continue to grow. We expect that based on models that we will get to 216,934 by 2040. So in the next 18 years, we're going to continue to grow. And we will need an annual average of 541 units to meet that growth. Okay. In comparison, we're at an all-time high in development as well. We're at 1,320 units this year. So our pace is now exceeding the need for growth. Next slide. We're using the high growth model. So you see in red there, there's 3 projections. There's the red, orange, and blue. The red is the high growth scenario. We're using that high growth scenario to set our goals and to meet the need. Next slide. So with that background, we've established a vision and some goals that we think are not only measurable, but achievable. The vision is Knoxville will continue to be a city attainable for all residents, regardless of their income level. And how do we do that? By 2029, 5 years, we will encourage the development of 6,000 to 8,000 units, including 2,000 newly constructed affordable housing units and the preservation of 1,000 affordable housing units. Now, as the mayor mentioned, that's 1,200 to 1,600 a year. Okay, let me explain that. The 541 only accommodates for new growth, okay? So this number represents not only the new growth, but what we feel like will change the situation from a market forces standpoint to drive down rents, as well as to accommodate for the expected loss of units. We lose units every year being substandard or being demolished. Next slide. And we've come up with 6 ways that we're going to get this work done. And tonight is really about these 6 levers. And so the speakers you will hear will dive into how these tools work and what our top priorities are. Let me just mention them briefly. The first one is amplify that affordable housing fund. It works. how can we find new investment for that fund? The second is leveraging the private sector through a process that is producing great results. We call it the public-private partnerships. You hear more about that in a second. Increasing housing stability through the Joint Office of Housing Stability. Preserving naturally occurring affordable housing. That's big. You know, we don't want to lose affordable housing as we add new housing units. And so preserving those and keeping them affordable is a lever that we hope to employ. And then land use. Simply put, we have to look at our city and be very mindful of using our land efficiently. We don't have many great green fields for development, and so our development opportunities are constrained and expensive, you know, along corridors and within the neighborhood. So our land use policies have to suggest and encourage future growth. And then finally, redeveloping blighted properties and turning them back into active, productive use. So you'll hear more about each of these strategies. And I'll start off next here with the first one, amplifying the Affordable Housing Fund. Next slide. The mayor is actively talking with, you know, foundations and other individuals to add to that Affordable Housing Fund. When I looked around the country, most funds are both public and private. In fact, most of them start with the private. It's usually activists that start it and start with the private money, and the cities are the last adopters. In this case, we've launched it here, you know, with Justice Knox and others, and we're saying, hey, we have a track record now. We know what it can do. And we believe that another $2 million will, you know, result in hundreds more units of affordable housing. The Affordable Housing Fund also provides great support to these catalytic, game-changing developments that KCDC is leading, and we're going to continue to provide infrastructure improvements to that. Next slide. More about the Affordable Housing Fund. $26.9 million in just 3 short years moving through that fund. And it has produced not only results, but the majority of the beneficiaries are not only low income, they're very low and extremely low income persons. The units that are built using our funding are energy efficient. We make sure that they're accessible and visitable, and that program has yielded, you know, some results that we're real proud of. And I have the privilege of only being here a year and going to several groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings. Next slide. There are some real numbers. 57% are extremely low income, 26% are very low income, and then 17% are in that 50 to 80 range. Next slide. You know, I've had questions about the low-income housing tax credits and why we put a lot of our resources to leveraging this money. Well, quite simply put, it's HUD's biggest program right now. Biden administration asked for $22 billion, I believe, for this program moving forward, and how it works is very interesting. Ben is an expert, and I've asked him to just give a quick little synopsis of how it works and how we are taking advantage of that money.
Can I speak from here? Hi, y'all. So that program, the cool thing about it really is the amount of leverage that it brings. So if we were trying, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the program as much as to say, let's use 2 million a year. If we were just building housing with 2 million contribution from the city, we could do great projects, but we would get, between 8 and 10 units. If we put that 2 million toward a $30 million tax credit deal, in many cases, those serve, as Kevin mentioned, extremely low-income families through the voucher program. We're looking at 100, 200 units. So it is the largest single source. It is not a great program by any means or a perfect program. There are some things that could be fixed at the congressional level, but it is the largest game in town, and it's very wise to design the local programs to match that in order to leverage the private sector and be able to do a lot more affordable units.
Thank you, Ben.
Councilwoman Parker, did you have a quick question?
Yeah, I have a question. And it's a question on slides that were a few slides back. I feel like it makes more sense to ask the question now than at the end. But when we're looking at the various housing units that have been developed, and you have a slide that shows us, and I can't read the number because it's too small, over 2,000 units and the various projects. Do we have that broken down in terms of how many of those units are subsidized, how many of those units are permanent supportive housing, how many are market rate?
Yeah. All of them are subsidized and available to low income. And I can get you the number before I'm done on permanent supportive housing. I have a number in my head that I just want to double check. But all of that money is going toward units that are affordable to those who hold a voucher, who are income, pay rent based on their income, all of them.
And the reason I ask is because a few slides back, you're looking at our inventory within the city.
Yeah.
And what that inventory looks like, how attainable it is to various income levels.
Yes.
But I don't get a sense of what we're developing and how that's addressing those various income levels.
Yes, and that is a great setup for these next levers. Because you're right, our federal monies are, Affordable Housing Fund is restricted. So our monies have to support 80% of the income below. So it's these other levers that are going to address the housing availability for that other group. That's why we have a two-step process. We have resources, and I mentioned, I feel like we have a lot of resources to get at that affordable housing. But it's going to take more creativity and other levers to address the workforce housing need.
So when you're talking about 3,000 new units over a certain time period, are you talking about for the low income, very low income?
57% are extremely low income, which means 30% of the area median. 20% are very low income, which is 50%. Or 17% of the is the next group. So all of them, 100%, fall into one of those three categories.
And how are we set up to track it?
So our team monitors, we monitor it initially when they rent up. Our Beth Bacon, our housing manager, sends out a survey, does a site visit, and then, we also do some annual monitoring because there's an affordability period that the monies that we have are forgivable based on compliance over 20 years. And so we monitor that compliance and make certain that, the developers and the management companies are doing what they said that they were going to do.
I'll say this, and then hopefully more of the conversation and presentation will help clarify some of these things. But, from a council perspective, we're hearing a need in the community from residents. And so they're asking, what are we doing about it? And if I point to a development that's, you know, the one that's coming in on Magnolia, you know, projected for 80% area median income. Most of the people who live in that neighborhood currently are not going to meet those income requirements. So they're like, where's the housing that I can afford?
Which one are you specifically mentioning?
The most recent Magnolia development that came before us near
McDonald's?
McDonald's, yeah.
Okay. Now, that is more of a mixed income development. That
Right.
would not tap into the Affordable Housing Fund.
Right, so I'm
So-
just trying to get some
Yeah.
clear information so we have an understanding of, oh, we have these mixed income, middle income projects underway.
Yeah.
And those are separated out from the lower income projects, so we can see what's in the hamper for that. And then we can see how that's
Exactly.
encouraging more market rate housing or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
but being able to distinguish what housing is coming online and what need we're meeting, rather than just seeing just looking at all housing as a whole and the total goal for all housing units.
Well, let me make it really simple, and I'll sum it up by saying this. The way I think about it is our cash, our money goes to low-income, very low-income, and extremely low-income projects. Our incentives, our tax incentives, these other levers that you're going to hear about today are getting at that workforce above that 80%. We have to do both, but, you know, the one you described are not necessarily getting our cash, but it's getting support through us through tax incentives and other measures. All right.
Thank you. And just, Ms. Hopper's timing any of our comments, so if I cut you off, it's because I'm watching the clock here, so.
Gotcha.
Back to you.
All right. Great segue. So next up is my colleague, Rebecca Jane Justice, is going to talk to you about leveraging the private sector along with Ben Bentley. Thank you.
Are you coming over? Or are you speaking from there? No, I'm coming over. Hey, everybody, and thank you, Kevin. We wanted to take a plunge into describing how we are able to leverage the private sector by creating the opportunity for public-private partnerships and how we build those partnerships in collaboration with KCDC and the city's urban design and development team. My team is Urban Design and Development, and we focus on building strategic partnerships to utilize incentives and infrastructure investments to support meaningful and connected communities that really give us the answers to the challenges as Knoxville grows. So meaningful partnerships that are to use incentives that are flexible and specific to guide growth. KCDC, Ben Bentley, everyone knows.
I often wonder what we do. No, so we're the Housing and Redevelopment Agency for the City of Knoxville. Obviously, you know us mainly in our role providing housing to 20,000 individuals at any given point, but we also assist the city with redevelopment activities, in particular the development of housing and infrastructure. So the partnership between the city and KCDC, I think, really taps into our ability as a developer to know a little bit about market conditions and how we can leverage our public incentives to get as much done as possible. And obviously the city has put a lot of resources beyond just the Affordable Rental Development Funds and their federal funding into that. So I think that's a little bit of what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, so how do we use the tools in our toolbox to be strategic but also flexible and cater to any development that comes our way? So in the past few years, really in the past 2 years, we have been able to encompass some really unique projects from this council. So workforce housing that has been included in market rate developments,
permanent supportive housing, affordable housing, mixed-use developments, and also adaptive reuse and redevelopment projects. We've also done some really strategic infrastructure projects that are the catalyst for these private developers along our corridors. Some of those infrastructure projects are Suttree Landing Park and the Waterfront Drive streetscapes, the North Central Street streetscapes, Magnolia Avenue streetscapes, and also Cumberland Avenue. The stadium and the Old City streetscapes are also a catalyst for public-private partnerships. At tomorrow's budget retreat, we will have many great photos to do a bit of a show and tell, to speak a little bit more to the specifics of those projects that have come across this council and that you have approved for development, and give you an update on where we are on those. So that'll come tomorrow, but we're ready for the next slide, Carter. So with the housing strategy, we're able to address a couple key priorities with our public-private partnership opportunities. We can really use these incentives very specifically, but also flexibly to address increasing housing supply across all markets. We also can create a redevelopment area along the East Magnolia corridor to bring some of that opportunity to another corridor and encourage mixed use and different types of housing opportunities. And next slide, Carter. Thank you.
All right, I think this is me. Sorry, y'all. So I think it's really important to have a context for the city of Knoxville and our economic power relative to the whole market, because a lot of times people look to local government to really solve the entirety of a problem. So I'm going to use 2022 data. The city of Knoxville's budget was $400 million plus a little bit, and the GDP for Knox County that same year was $31 billion. And the reason I think that's important, it really speaks to how critical it is that we have great public-private partnerships. We can be a piece of that. A lot of Kevin's programs in housing neighborhood development are really good ways to leverage the private sector, but these incentive programs that we're talking about here through public-private partnerships are arguably the most effective tool to make development of all housing types happen. I think it's important for you all to know low-income housing tax credit projects, anything from permanent supportive housing at Caswell Manor or Callahan Flats, all the way up to market rate deals with the workforce housing that RJ mentioned. All of that stuff is typically applies for tax abatement or some kind of support from the city in terms of a public-private partnership. And in many cases, if there is a public benefit in terms of affordability, we support those projects. The reason I want y'all to know that, any project that's housing related that comes and applies to us, and there may be a small exception of student housing, which those deals tend to be all right on their own, but we support those, we consider them, and we think more housing is really important. One thing I want to say about this slide, so historically, I think y'all are familiar. Many of you lived here a lot longer than me, a lot longer than I've been alive. Boom, sorry, that was offensive, wasn't it? So, joking, I'm trying to add a little levity to the room. Y'all are very young council. Anyway, so we started.
Speak for
We
yourself.
started, yeah, I know.
You've lost the crowd now.
We started, you're number one, Tommy. We started from a place where we were really focusing on historic preservation of downtown buildings. So not a lot of new construction, and it really did focus on a downtown-centric strategy. But over the last 5 years, for a variety of reasons, I think one being administration's emphasizing areas outside of downtown, which is good, market conditions and opportunities for redevelopment, mixed use on the corridors. Yeah, that was a shout out to Councilman Roberto there. I think through all of those things, we have started to pivot our emphasis. I mean, downtown is still important, but to other areas, and then also to new construction, projects that aren't simply finding an old building and doing something new with it, but ground up stuff that's gonna meaningfully impact our housing supply. So that was a very long-winded way of saying a lot of history there. We started simple, but we have really taken a more expansive view of our incentives over the last few years.
It's hard to follow the jokes, but or follow them and follow behind you. But next slide, Carter. We have taken a more expansive view, but we have taken these early successes of our incentive projects and used that as an opportunity to be more specific about the types of projects that we want to incentivize in our community. So about 3 years ago, we came up with our key development priorities for incentives. So we outline project type, project location, project characteristics, and project integration with existing amenities. And some of the highlights in those are, project type. We are focused on housing. We are focused on all types of housing, but especially housing that includes a workforce component or that is affordable or mixed income. We are also very interested in projects that are aligned with our active transportation and transit network, also that are complementary to our recent city investments in infrastructure, so streetscapes projects, public parks, access to resources. Also, like Ben said, along the corridor, like really focusing on the corridors and aligning with our the corridors that lead out of the city with the streetscape improvements that can really be a catalyst to attract development for safe streets, walkability, really complementing our Vision Zero goals also. The LIHTC projects, as Kevin and Ben mentioned, you don't see those come through council, but we do look at each and every one of those LIHTC projects through our public-private partnership review team. So there are points in those projects where we can negotiate other amenities too. So just for example, these key development priorities set the stage to use all of these bullet points and categories as negotiation tools in coming to a final agreement for a project. So we also, Carter, if you'll flip to the map, we made that great list, and then we thought, how can we really have a better way to communicate this internally with our own partners through interdepartmental conversations, conversations with council, conversation with developers inside the city, outside the city, and also just community members who want to understand these topics a little bit more. So we created a map in partnership with Knox Planning and KGIS, and we mapped all of the things you saw listed on the key development priorities. So the first layer you saw pop up there was the existing incentive projects. The green lines there start to show the city infrastructure investments. We also have the redevelopment areas highlighted, and then we also have cat routes and stops. So you can see how all of those key development priorities start to layer in and really paint a picture of how Knoxville is growing and how we want Knoxville to grow to help us address some of our challenges. And on to the next slide, Carter. Thank you.
All right, so this is me again, and I think it's important anytime you're dealing, when you're partnering, not dealing, with the private sector to establish a clear framework and expectations. And so over the last 3 to 4 years, this administration not only has developed the development priorities which provide that framework, but also a timeline and the expectations that developers can look to. Because as Councilwoman Fugit mentions a lot, they have to have certainty around the financing of their deals and the closing date, and I think this has been a really key step in that process. So there are multiple steps here. You can read them. They're online. But the main 2 aspects of this review throughout those steps are, on the front end, how does this project relate to the development priorities of the city? And do we as a city want to invest in this project from a policy and public good perspective? That's step 1. Step 2 is the but-for or the third party or whatever you all want to call it. It's a financial review where we vet the project and make sure, and every project goes through this, that there is a need for the development incentive. And I've said before to several of you, it's not perfect. It's 80% science, 20% art. there are some numbers that ebb and flow, and everything changes until a development closes. But we kick the tires very hard just to ensure that there's not an excessive return on any of these things that we're supporting. So just wanted you all to be aware. Consistent approach to development. I think there's an element of equity and transparency that's really important that has been implemented on y'all's watch. So thank you for encouraging that. And I think I'm probably supposed to segue here. Segue.
That's right. So, and just one more note before we go into this slide is all of those, I know we had some small text there on your handouts and on the screen. Those are listed on our website. They're also printable PDFs, and the map is linked through our Urban Design and Development website. So many resources there at your fingertips through our website.
So now we're going to talk about a specific tool, and I kidded Councilman Roberto, but seriously, mixed use on the corridors is a big deal, and the city has known that there are underutilized parcels in all parts of town for a long time. One specific thing that the administration is looking at putting into place is a redevelopment area along Magnolia, understanding that there's a lot of opportunity for the repurposing of underutilized parcels, potentially as housing or mixed use that can serve that community. And, the other thing that I'll mention here is the city has been investing in that area for, a long time now. And I think there are several recent projects and investments that we can point to that this will really build on. So in a minute, I'm going to cover some of the high-level advantages of putting this in place. But I think right now, if you would talk a little about the city investments.
Yeah, so in 2009, we did a Magnolia Avenue corridor plan where we looked at the whole area and looked at this is kind of an analysis that stemmed from the corridor study, the East City Sector Plan, and the Magnolia Avenue Streetscape Plan. So diagrams like this, we work with consultants and Knox Planning to help us identify areas of opportunity, areas of challenge, areas that are need improvement in a whole realm of categories. So analysis documents like this really have helped us set the stage for investment since the early 2000s, and we have begun with the Magnolia Avenue Streetscapes, which the first phases were completed around 2014. We recently announced our investment in a new fire station in the Burlington area. We also have a streetscapes project plan for Burlington. We have completed a couple of projects east Burlington Commons and the Ammons, and recently council approved 2 incentive projects that will really help the Magnolia corridor take shape and be revitalized. The Park City Apartments, which is a mixed income housing development that is a restoration of historic structures, and also the restoration of the Swan Bakery building, which is along a transit line in a historic structure and along a city investment of a streetscape project. So that will be, those 2 projects will come online in the next 2 years. We also have continued partnerships with programming, Chilhowie Park, and with the zoo, Knoxville, and the Muse. So a lot of really exciting things that help build great communities here that we would like to capture the momentum and continue to build on that energy by establishing a redevelopment area.
And that's a great way to segue it. So with all of that going on, the redevelopment area really will provide, and a good way to think about it, and Vice Mayor Smith is very aware of the growth that has occurred in the South Waterfront, and I don't want to compare those two because they're different areas and they have different strengths and weaknesses and all of the above. But mechanically, some of the growth that has happened in that area has lended itself to reinvesting in infrastructure and other things that can serve that area. So there's sort of a regenerative equality from an economic standpoint to a TIF area and a redevelopment area. So the 3 main benefits would be financially, tax increment finance becomes usable in that area, so any growth in the taxes over some period of time can be reinvested in infrastructure or specific projects. If there are affordable housing projects that make sense, they could be invested in that area as well. Second piece, there are sometimes grants such as EPA and other sort of environmental cleanup grants, remediation type grants that are eligible and focused on areas like that. So there's a benefit to having the area in place for that reason. Also from an acquisition standpoint, in some cases, as you all know, because I've heard y'all discuss it at length, there are properties that for various reasons, maybe there's multiple heirs, maybe there are some environmental challenges, the owner or owners are just unable to do anything with the property and it sits vacant for an extended period of time. There is the ability to use different means of acquisition, and I'm really not focusing on eminent domain. That is one way that we could do it, but there's also a lot of flexibility in terms of just working with an owner to be able to make acquisitions in that area with just a normal market type process. So all of that really opens doors, I think, for continued growth and revitalization in a smart way within that area. We have talked a lot about, obviously, housing and increasing housing supply, and obviously very important related to that is also keeping people housed and housing stability. So at this point, I think, am I too early, or are we turning it over to Aaron Reed?
I think we're ready for it.
Cool.
Thank you very much. So
Ms.
increasing
Reed,
housing.
just before you jump in, sorry, Councilmember Roberto had a quick question.
Looking at the pictures that we have of the Magnolia project, I can't obviously see what the highlights are in there, but are we highlighting their existing tax incremental financing space there, or is that something you're projecting to do? I'm just unclear exactly what I'm looking
I
at.
would encourage you not to latch on to this diagram. It is not a final product. This was a study and analysis diagram done in 2013. So it really, what the purpose of this is just to show you how we can evaluate this area and look at what parts are successful, what parts need attention, and how we can create that new redevelopment area.
So we would, what you're saying is you've got a study and you're looking at the viability of adding additional tax incremental financing to help this project, which you're still in the process of working on, move forward. Is that right?
We want to build on the studies of the past from Magnolia Avenue Corridor and Magnolia Avenue Streetscapes to establish a new redevelopment area that has the capacity to have a TIF district within that area to assist projects to come alive along the corridor.
Okay, so to put a fine point on it, you're looking at putting a TIF over this area so you could make that a piece of a redevelopment plan overall that's not there currently?
Yes.
Okay, so then my next question is, there was another map that was a bigger map, not just focused in on the corridor of Magnolia, and it looks like there were a lot of tentacles going out along the other corridors in town. Are there, I'm not sure what that, I think it's a green line represents, but is that indicating that there are existing tax incremental financing areas for redevelopment along the corridors already?
The map will show you in those colorful blobs that you saw, those are redevelopment areas. Some of our redevelopment areas have TIF districts within them. Some of our redevelopments are their own TIF districts, and I feel like that's a whole nother workshop in itself. But a redevelopment area, establishing a redevelopment area gives the opportunity to use tax increment financing. So the thin green lines that you see, those are under the category of active capital improvements. So the long skinny green lines, those would be like streetscape projects most likely.
Okay.
So if you click on, one of those long green lines, it will say Magnolia Avenue Streetscapes, a city investment, $14 million, finished in 2014.
Okay, so there would be a need to create more of these redevelopment areas along the corridors if we were looking at an expansive approach on this that don't exist right now. Is that correct?
It could be. I mean, depending on what the goals are for different corridors, I think every corridor in our community has a different set of opportunities and challenges and needs for direction. So that could be a benefit.
Okay, but that answer makes me think that the answer is that we don't currently have an expanded redevelopment zone along all the corridors, but that might be something we would look into doing in the future.
You could do that.
Okay,
The existing, if you look at the bigger colored areas here, those are the existing redevelopment areas.
okay. And this is, I can't even tell what, I'm also looking at it from a very odd
Right,
angle.
sure.
And from there, it's not great to see, but from here, it's a little bit better.
Well, I think from your desktop at home, it
I'll
will,
be able to see it.
there's text and the ability to zoom in and out and read annotations and things, so it will be a little more clear and helpful, I hope.
Okay, we'll get together if it's not, but
Sure.
I appreciate that. The other question I had is, with regard to the corridors, when there is seen because we all drive by these all the time where there's maybe a vacant area or an area that seems underutilized, what does your team do when you see something like that? Do you ever go out and talk to an owner? I know some owners are out of state and out of town, but we have local owners too. Is there a process by which you connect with folks and talk to them about the incentives that the city has?
We typically do not approach private property owners. We have a lot of folks that approach us and that are local and not local, and ask about certain properties and certain incentive opportunities within our city. Most cities do have some type of incentive program, so they've either learned about it through other work with other partners, but we typically do not approach private property owners unless there is a code violation or a safety issue. I think we've talked about this before in council, it's a bit challenging to make lists and say, this property is not doing well, but it's not condemned. So to approach those people is a little bit challenging for the city to do.
Can I
Is
build
there-
on that a little bit?
Yeah.
I think
Please.
economically, one thing to think about is that, I hate to be this way, the market and the people that are trying to find opportunities for development typically are way ahead of any list that could be produced by KCDC. Love us, but I mean, they are. And so I think a lot of that legwork, in some cases, we find out, this site, we either know this site has had environmental challenges for a long time. The city would reach out to us, and a lot of times we have those conversations about acquisition or environmental remediation. But in the case of I'm going to use a strip mall as an example. There's a strip mall somewhere on Chapman. It's kind of vacant, but it's kind of occupied, and boy, it would make great mixed use. I think it's a pretty precarious situation for the city to put themselves in to beyond just an initial maybe, hey, these development incentives are available, to actively approach that group about what they're doing with their property. And the second part I would say to that, unless there is a significant amount of funding available to truly go in and try to make an acquisition.
Well, and I'll add to that, I think that investment along corridors is a great idea, but I think it works both ways too. For a lot of commercial, retail, office spaces that are in walkable communities to be successful, you really need a lot of people, walking on the sidewalks and going to buy a coffee or take their child to daycare. So often you might have a development that's just off a corridor, that's a housing development that is really the catalyst for a piece of property along a corridor that's commercial to be successful. So I think it's a win-win wherever you start, but often it starts with increasing population and foot traffic in order for those corridors to be successful.
But, so what I'm getting from this conversation, I'm sure I'm going to get my time's probably up. But
Indeed.
if I can finish this one last one.
Got him started on corridors.
What I was asking about is, what I'm hearing is that there is either a reluctance or a specific reason that the city does not approach owners about potential for redevelopment using some of the tools that exist. You're relying on them to come to you, which they do.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Parker.
Thank you. As you are looking at what strategies to implement along each corridor, looking to increase the population and the foot traffic, as you said, what strategies do you look to and implement to prevent current residents from being pushed out of the neighborhood?
What's that? We are going to talk about that later in the presentation, but I'll give an example right now of, we're really working on some master planning in the South Waterfront area, and there's a lot of new development potential there, and we're working very closely with the community members and looking closely at what the existing zoning is so we can find the right balance of infrastructure improvements that don't just facilitate large multifamily developments that create a hierarchy of livable spaces for mixed incomes, and the right types of infrastructure improvements that are complete streets and that have multiple options for transit, active transportation, bike lanes, sidewalks. So you're attracting and catering to people across all incomes and all housing markets. And we try to diversify our incentives to make sure we're addressing each of those categories.
Are you targeting developments for certain income levels along each corridor?
We use workforce housing and affordable housing as a negotiation tool to include in workforce or in market rate developments. And all of the market rate developments that we have incentivized in the last 3 years, we have negotiated a certain percentage of workforce housing, so at the 80% area median income. So I think that's a big step for Knoxville to be able to start to be more strategic and use those key development priorities as negotiation tools to be more thoughtful and meaningful about the outcomes of these projects.
I think it's really important, and as we've gotten into these conversations, it was said at some point that there's, I've been pushing for housing for the very low income, and I've been told that that's not where the greatest need is. But when I look at the charts that you all showed me, that's where the greatest need is in our city. So I'm starting to see more incentive programs that are pushing the market rate, but trying to capture some workforce housing. Sometimes it's 4 units, sometimes it's a dozen, sometimes it's 40. But less of an emphasis on housing for those making 30% and below.
So one data point, just because that is a really good question, and the incentive process, so the low-income housing tax credit pilots that don't have to come under state law before this body for approval, we have approved either the preservation or new construction of about 4,000 affordable units. So it dwarfs to the tune of 2 or 3 times what we've done for the market rate with the workforce. And it's not enough. Like, we need to be doing more, right? But I do think it is important from a context standpoint to know there are these same incentives that are being applied in an even more significant way to those types of projects that serve extremely very low income and low income families. Does that make sense? I hope it does.
It does, but I'm still trying to track the numbers, and I'm having a hard time doing that because we would need to invest at a greater rate in the very low-income housing.
The other thing I'd love to say, I don't think there has been any low-income developer that has approached the city at least I'm not aware of one that has been turned down for this type of incentive.
Oh, I know of one.
Okay, well
Okay.
then, let's, we should talk afterward, because
Sure.
we really, that is the kind of thing that we've been very deliberate about trying to incentivize, so.
Okay.
Councilwoman Fugit?
Thank you. Unlike my colleague, Mr. Thomas, I turned on my mic and didn't have my light on, so, sorry. I just want to challenge the thinking on the fact that the city need not get involved in talking about redevelopment and approaching people. Downtown was redeveloped by doing that. I understand you can't go promise stuff, but if we're really interested in a part of town, we better let a lot of people know it. And if money is scarce, then the competition to get the grants will get us better projects. So I would just challenge us to rethink. Maybe the city doesn't go directly, but there are ways to make sure that this is the part of town that the city wants action in. And the Magnolia Corridor has been talked about a long time, and I know everybody wants it, and it's a long time coming, but we got to say open for business somehow. We said open for business for South Knoxville. We said we're open for business for downtown. And so I would just challenge us to think bigger than the city knocking on doors. And I'm not saying we need a list, but everybody knows where there are some opportunities. So you let the real estate community know. You let real commercial realtors know. We have to go talk about this is approved, this is what we're doing. I know I'm preaching to some of you as the choir, but I just do not accept that we have to wait for people to come to us. And I'm not sure that that's exactly what you were saying, but that's kind of how it sounded. So I'm just encouraging much more robust when it is established, that it is very clear, and we look back on what the city did to energize downtown and what the city did to energize South Knoxville, and do it again.
Can I
Councilwoman
add-
Parker.
I just have to add one thing to that, because I really agree with a lot that Councilmember Fugate said, but I still have to continue to emphasize that all of these projects, there's a portion of our community feeling left out or pushed out. And so we have to not only learn from what good has happened, but look at what has had some negative implications as well. And all of these projects have had them. That's it.
On that note, Director Reed, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about the portion of the plan around increasing housing stability. Next slide. 3 key priorities. The first is for my office to develop an action plan, a strategic plan to address homelessness. This was something the last time that I addressed you that we had been talking about. Councilwoman Parker, I know you had asked about community input, about truly democratic process in creating that strategic plan, and I want to update you and announce that my board is complete. And so we are going to be kicking off that community input process here in the next few weeks. So I'm very excited about that. Second key priority, to support the Homeless Coalition and the Youth Action Board to develop a strategic plan for addressing youth homelessness. This is part of the YHDP grant that was recently awarded to our community. Sean Griffith is here. He was a huge part of getting that money here, and I'll talk a little more about it later in the presentation. Third key priority, develop additional units of permanent supportive housing, which is a type of housing where we're seeing really good outcomes in the city of Knoxville. Next slide. So I wanted to do a little bit of a data overview. I think you've probably seen a lot of this data before. I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but to talk through who is homeless in our community, how long do they stay homeless, where are they from, and why are they on the street. Next slide. So we have several different ways of measuring the number of people who are homeless. Every January, like most other communities, we do a point-in-time count. In 2023, which are the most recently available numbers, we counted 925 people homeless. That includes people living in shelters and transitional housing, and also those staying in their cars or on the street. So of those 925, 223 were unsheltered. They were living on the street or in cars, other places not meant for human habitation. However, with the point-in-time count, because of the way that we conduct that count, we know it's an undercount. So to give you an example, in January 2024, the warming centers, the church-based warming centers that opened during our severe weather event, on their busiest night, sheltered 288 people who had no other options for shelter during that severe event. So the 223 from point-in-time count is definitely low. Another way of measuring how many people are homeless, how many people are falling into homelessness each month, that's 250. That's third quarter last year, most recently available number. And that is a lot of people. And I'll talk more in a moment about homeless services and kind of, the population we have flowing into the homeless services system and comparing it with the numbers we have flowing out of that system. It's not a great picture, just to give you a preview. In general, we have 1,600 people who are accessing homeless services every day, also a lot of people. So who are they? Where are they from? 4 out of 5 are from Knoxville and Knox County. Whenever I'm at a public meeting or talking with members of the public, that comes up always, is the perception that people are being bused here or being sent here by other communities. Well, what we know from our data is that 4 out of 5 people who are becoming homeless became homeless here. So even if there was no one coming into our community homeless, we would still have most of the issue that we have right now. And of people who became homeless in the third quarter of 2023, almost 2/3 report that they became homeless due to the lack of affordable, attainable housing. So this is what you're seeing here is the human cost of the underdevelopment that Director DuBose mentioned earlier in the presentation. Next slide. So the trends in the data, what we're seeing right now over the past year or two is that the average duration of homelessness is increasing. People are staying in emergency shelters longer, and that is simply because it is harder to find housing. And housing costs are increasing. That's been pretty well documented earlier in the presentation. And here's the inflow-outflow picture. So as of third quarter last year, for every 5 people who became homeless, 2 exited the system housed. And so you can see we have a problem in our homeless services system. Next slide. Housing inventory count, this is done at the same time as the point-in-time count every January. And this just gives us an idea of the utilization rates of homeless services in the community. So emergency shelters, 92% full, transitional housing, 73% full, permanent supportive housing, 96% full. So you can see definitely on the shelter side and the permanent supportive housing side, we are operating at very close to capacity. Next slide. And I did want to mention specifically the youth point-in-time count. This is done at a different time. We did it in the spring to try to increase response rates. Surveyed 68 youth. And there were a lot of really striking findings from that. 80% of them reported mental health challenges. 40% had been in foster care. We know that kids aging out of foster care really need more support than they're getting right now in our community, and you see that in this data. 40% identified as LGBTQ+, also a very large number that is actually commensurate with the percentage we see nationally. So at the national level, about 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ+ as well. And 27% reported being Black or multiracial. So again, disproportionate representation among the youth homeless of vulnerable populations. Next slide. And so that's a great segue to the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program. It's $1.8 million for youth and young adult homelessness programs. There will be a focus. The coordinated community plan is currently under development for this, but there will be a focus on populations of color and LGBTQ+ populations. We are receiving extensive technical assistance from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. One of the most amazing things about this grant is that it adds up to $900,000 in renewable funding every year to Knoxville's annual allocation under HUD's Continuum of Care program. So that means moving forward, we get $900,000 more every year than we would have if we had not gotten this grant. So it is funding that's going to be funding projects on an ongoing basis. Next slide. And so I wanted to close by talking about the homeless services system. So two of the key priorities are around specific type of housing, permanent supportive housing, a specific vulnerable population, youth. But the Office of Housing Stability Strategic Plan is going to cover our whole homeless services system. So not only coordinated entry, which is the way that we assess people's vulnerability levels, assess what services are going to be right for them, but also homeless outreach, emergency shelter, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing. Next slide. So all of these things are going to be part of the Office of Housing Stability Strategic Plan. As we kick off our community input process, you'll be hearing a lot about this, and I look forward to coming back to you with an update. And if there are no questions, I'm kicking it back to Kevin for naturally occurring affordable housing.
Director Reed, we do have a question. Councilwoman
Just
Parker.
one quick one. Around the same time period of this report, end of 2022, 2023, we had some transitional housing programs that lost funding, and I remember working with them to try to help figure out where folks were going to go. But my experience has not been that there are available beds for folks to go into. So I was surprised to see the occupancy rate of transitional housing at, 3/4, just 75%. Could it possibly be the tracking or what, or do we really have that much available transitional housing in the community?
So transitional housing is, it's a different animal than obviously the other types of supportive housing that we have, and rapid rehousing too, that we have in our community. Part of the nature of it is that there's going to be turnover. Part of the nature of it is that's trying to, give people case management and definitely push them, into permanent housing on their own. That could be one reason for that low rate. The short answer is I don't know all the reasons for that comparatively low rate of utilization of transitional housing. And that is going to be one of the things that we need to figure out as we are putting together the strategic plan. Because if our utilization rates are comparatively low for transitional housing, it does seem like we need to be able to get people into those beds.
Right.
Because we obviously have a need.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
Director Reed, I just have a comment more than a question. As you develop the strategic plan, I think one of the things on the note of, on the point of coordinated entry system, having been involved in helping homeless for a long time in this community, particularly the past few years, my experience has been that we have a coordinated entry database, but we have more of a fragmented entry system. And what I mean by that is there's no single place where the entire community can point someone to that says, if you need housing, you may not know the right agencies to start with, but you can go right there and someone from those agencies will be there and you won't fall through cracks. When people get into a system, I think we do have a good database and obviously we can track services, but I strongly encourage us to consider a coordinated entry place where everybody can rely on, whether it's a day center or what have you, just to think about the value of a consistent place that we know we can point anyone who wants that housing, where triaging can happen, as opposed to an outreach worker meets someone and says, we're with this agency and we're open on these days and these times, whereas if a different agency reaches them in a different neck of the woods, they're open and they have different services, and then we're relying on those individual agencies to then triage and connect to the other agencies, and this is hard work, as you know, and so all of those agencies are narrowly focused on the thing in front of them, and they try to collaborate with whatever left energy and capacity they have. Just think a lot about how the agencies can work together that we fund to do the good work and to work together.
Well, just to address that very quickly, you're exactly right. A coordinated entry system has to be coordinated. What I have seen in the past few months since taking this position is that HMIS, Knox HMIS, is making real efforts at reaching out to other agencies to get them on board so that we can really build a no wrong door approach. So that we have multiple different agencies doing housing assessments, which is what we need, and that they're well-trained, and that they can move people through these systems efficiently. And here's where we come back to that inflow-outflow problem. So if we have 5 people becoming homeless and only 2 exiting the system housed, one of the things we're really going to need to work on under the strategic plan is in getting housing units that are aligned with our system, housing units where people can be slotted into those housing units according to their needs and vulnerabilities through the coordinated entry system. And so it's not just on the inflow side, but also on the outflow side where we really need to be thinking about and taking action on aligning actual physical housing units with our coordinated entry system. We're talking a lot about that right now on Homeless Coalition, and it's going to be one of the big focuses in the strategic plan. But I really appreciate you focusing on coordinated entry because I think people hear coordinated entry and their eyes glaze over, when in fact, it's really the key to our whole system.
Thank you. Director DuBose.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Smith. Before I move on to NOAA, let me close the loop on your question. Since 2019, there have been 254 units of permanent supportive housing that are either been built or under construction, you know, including, we broke ground on Callahan Flats, that's 58 units, Liberty Place, 32 units, just opened 48 at Caswell Manor, and at the last meeting, you approved 50 for Bell Street. So we're getting closer to 300 unit, adding to the 2 that existed prior to 2019. So we've more than quadrupled, 5 times the inventory that existed before. All right, moving on to NOAA. Next slide. Our priorities here, and let me just explain what NOAA is. Naturally occurring affordable housing is the biggest source of affordable housing. It's unsubsidized. It's affordable because it's usually a little bit older. But in tight markets, those units also become market rate. And so what many cities have done is geared incentives toward these naturally occurring affordable housing through a process sort of like ours, our PPP. And so we want to leverage that. And I also should mention too, to the question that was asked earlier, there are 4,081 units that are currently being supported by tax incentives. And it's 5 times the number of market rate housing units. So, you know, the PPP process through our incentives is doing its work as needed. We want to preserve those, you know, smaller complexes as well, and so our minimum threshold will be 5 units. So if you have a 5-unit development, you will be able to qualify, and it's older than 30 years old for our NOAA tax incentives. You know, the hope is that, you know, those units will be brought up to code if need be, And then also our last priority there is we want to use our federal home dollars to preserve older private apartment complexes. Next slide. I mentioned most of that. Next slide. Just to note, and this area will be pretty quick, but 71% of our housing stock is older than 30 years old, and 47% is older than 50 years old, okay? And so it's important that we address this area. A few months ago, council gave us the authority to look at that, and so we're in the process of putting this program, you know, and inventorying, and I want to map them and make sure that developers understand that this is a way to help keep those units affordable. You know, some market factors exist in terms of why they needing to charge more rent in some instances. You know, the construction costs, have gone through the roof. As my friend Alvin Nance always says, that there's not an affordable housing section at Home Depot, so the material costs are the material costs. And so even when you're building new affordable housing, it costs the same as market rate. It's only the incentives that make it affordable. All right, next slide. All right, moving on to advancing land use policy and bringing up Chief Ball.
Good evening, everyone. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. One of the most important levers that we have to pull is looking at how we utilize the land within the city. We are looking always for opportunities to update our zoning code and to encourage the development of housing as it is appropriate to do. Another detail that I know you all have heard some about, we'll share some today and some tomorrow on as well, is our commitment to development services and making sure that we are making a smooth process for our development community. Next slide. So zoning code updates are a continuous process, really. Our city and our planning staff work collaboratively on our zoning code, which is a living document. As Knoxville grows and evolves, our zoning code needs to grow and evolve. Many of you recall, some of you more painfully than others, potentially, the significant assessment and update that we did in 2018 to our zoning code. And then recently, City Council was approved a brand new piece of code for middle housing. Thank you for that. I appreciate your all's, it was detailed, there was a lot there, and I appreciate that you all were willing to dig in and understand the details and share with us what you wanted us to be on the lookout for with that particular piece of code. We're really excited to be working with CAT, the Knox Area Transit. They have received an Areas of Persistent Poverty grant, and we're working with them and planning staff on transit accessible housing opportunities, and I expect that in March we will have more details to share with you and probably an agenda item for you all to be voting on related to really specifically diving in to housing that is in proximity to our transit lines. Our teams are diving in between planning and our plans review and inspections teams. They literally live in our zoning code every day, all day. They're answering questions from people who are trying to figure out what needs to happen. They're reviewing plans, and they're trying to help facilitate getting people the answers that they need. It's a great position to be in to help identify where we have some snags, some little tweaks that we need to make. And so we are always looking for ways to make our zoning code more clear and concise that complements our communities and our neighborhoods. and that reflects the needs of our growing community. Next slide. Development Services, Mayor Kincannon made a commitment to make the process for investing in Knoxville efficient, predictable, and consistent. And thanks to City Council again, most recently you provided some support through a budget amendment. And we're making a big investment. This is going to include staff, some technical consultants, some technology improvements, and some short-term support to address our backlog of projects. We're already making great progress, and as you all have heard before, my colleague, COO Grant Rosenberg's been directly tasked with working on this, and he will also be providing a little more detail for you all tomorrow. But one of the things that I think is particularly exciting and that we have heard from the development community about is they love that we're going to really focus on data-driven benchmarks for our team based on the type of project that's submitted. That makes a big difference to them as they're looking forward to projects. As our city continues to grow, our team is committed to working with our constituents to identify what are the ongoing improvements that we need to make to this process. And with that, I will turn it back over to Mr. DuBose.
Thank you. Thank you. And then finally, our last strategy is last but not least, we want to redevelop vacant and blighted properties. Next slide. Key priorities here is we want to inventory those vacant and blighted properties along corridors to see what we have. And, you know, that will be a process in getting that information over time. We want to use this as a catalyst to spur not only development, but also home ownership. And we've traditionally done that through our Homemakers program. And we want to expand that program. Homemakers right now does a really good job of getting property in the hands of developers for housing use, but it's limited to residential lots. And so the expansion will allow us to do non-residential, to go after larger parcels so we can do more middle housing as well. Next slide. A little bit more information on Homemakers. There have been 58 transfers since 2019. These properties were vacant, blighted, not on the tax rolls, and have been put back into active use. 19 of those were done by nonprofit developers, 36 for-profit developers. And, you know, for the most part, about 70% have benefited either low and mod income owners or owner occupants, and 18 of those have been market rate. Next slide. We also want to acquire vacant and blighted properties in these redevelopment areas. This is a pre-development site of the Ammons on Asheville Highway. It was an old motel and had graffiti, and all the units were open, and that became, you know, a nice affordable housing complex. We want to continue to do that. City Council recently has set aside $2.3 million for us to do some acquisition. And again, you know, these larger parcels are going to be more expensive, and so we're in the process of identifying how to best use those fundings, that funding. Next slide. And we have a particular treat to show you today. Not only do we have the 6 levers that we talked about, but we have a way to keep up with everything in real time. And Carter Hall is going to overview our Knoxville Housing Dashboard. And you get the chance to see this first. Carter.
Thank you, Director DuBose. Good evening, Council. So as you've seen, throughout the last hour and 40 minutes. A lot of these strategies have involved using data, using numbers to help guide the strategies. And I think that it's great that this administration and this plan reflects data-driven decision-making. And we wanted to really continue that on and make sure that that's implemented and a secure part of the housing strategy moving forward. So as a part of that, we thought a great way to do that would be to create a publicly available housing dashboard to reflect what is going on in Knoxville and really accomplish three main things. The first and potentially most critically is to make sure that the public is informed and stays up to date on what is going on in our housing market, why are the challenges that folks are facing are occurring, and allowing them to better understand using numbers and using quantitative information to see what's happening in the city. We also wanted to use this as an opportunity to explain to the public, really what is going on in terms of city investment in affordable housing and incentives that the city is doing for just housing development in general. And really the third thing that I think is important about having the dashboard is as we start to implement these strategies or continue on strategies that we've been doing, is it moving the needle? Are we making sure that the strategies are actually making a difference for folks? Are we seeing the numbers move in the way that we need them to? So with that, I will kick it over to the dashboard. Wanted to give a chance to just kind of run through it with you all, show off the tools. I'm not going to necessarily do any deep data analysis tonight, but give you an opportunity to see what it is and potentially answer any questions about that. I did want to say that this was created in partnership with our planning department. Really want to specifically shout out Aubrey Wayland and Terry Gilhula, who helped a lot with this, both in sourcing and putting this together. And excitingly, this dashboard, as of today, is live. You can access it on the Housing and Neighborhood Development website or go to www.knoxvilletn.gov/housing data to access the dashboard. So with that, and I will say, as I pull it up and we get cozy here, it might look a little funky at times just with the projector, but if you pull it up at home, everything should come into the way we need it to be, but we will just go for it here. So this is the homepage of the Knoxville Housing Dashboard. Really, the first thing that you will see on here is a general overview of generally where we are at, both with rent and sales prices on the left side here. So you will see, and this is the only place in the dashboard that actually uses Knoxville Metropolitan Statistical Area data. That is beyond just the city limits. That's going to include the county, and that's how the census generally tracks our region. That's going to also include places as far as Luttrell, Wartburg, places like that are also included in this. But we did want to be able to provide that consistent data for you to see where our median rent is at, as well as the national rates, both for rent and median home sales prices. So you're able to see that on the left side here. As you go to the right side, this is again where you're able to see some of the development that's happening with the city. 2,377 affordable housing units have been funded by the city since 2019. And then you're also able to see by year residential units that have been permitted, and that's across all units, whether it's affordable or market rate. This also, I think helps kind of reflect what Director DuBose was saying earlier about really a slow start coming out of the recession, and we have seen an upward trend growth in units permitted, and really we're reaching back to some higher levels in the current administration that are delineated by the yellow here. You're able to move on as you go through the dashboard to go to some of the challenge information here. And when we say challenge, really kind of what is creating the pressure that we're seeing in our housing market. You've already seen these in the beginning of the presentation, but this graph goes through and will show by year the amount of units that have been permitted, both for multifamily, single family, and then other. That's, your now, as we know, missing middle. As well as the net population gains. And again, we will continue to track that year to year as we get updated information from our planning department. This graph as well, which shows not available units, but existing units. throughout different income levels by annual renter income, defined by what they can afford by HUD standards. Again, Director DuBose explained that, but happy to continue to elaborate on that further. We also have just these general, performance indicators of how our market is, or really just a snapshot synopsis of it. So you can see here that we have 44,500 households that are renting, 40,500 occupied households, so people who actually own their homes. Our planning department went ahead and did a snapshot. I think that this was taken in the summer of 2023, that the estimated median new rental listing, so that's not the median rent within the city. That actually is sitting really more at about I think it's $1,097, but this is the estimated new rental listing. Again, all of these numbers here are just within the city limits, not the metropolitan statistical area. Knoxville median household income, which again, important to pull this out because it is significantly different than the Knoxville MSA. And then again, another snapshot analysis of the median home sales price for the city of Knoxville. Again, want to make a distinction, that's not the new listing price. You'll see that number somewhere. This is the actual median sales home price from the planning analysis. And I will go back to something real quick. Did want to also highlight in the progress tab and really what the city is doing to see new housing development, both direct investment in new affordable housing, like Director DuBose said, the cash that we're giving to help the folks at the lowest end of the income scales, but also the incentives for new housing development. Up until this dashboard, there wasn't really a place to see both of those things, or really all of the city investment, all the work that the city is doing in one place. So this is where people can go and see all this presented geographically. How this map works is the circles are affordable housing developments that the city has directly helped fund. The larger the circles are, the more units are a part of that. The darker the shade of purple, the more the city directly invested. And with each one of those, you're able to actually click on the circle, get more information on it, see how many units are a part of that, the different funding sources, how much the city contributed versus outside sources. You're able to also, again, I think geographically, this is important to help show the disbursement geographically of those affordable housing developments. Just to give you another example, Moss Grove, where it's located, how much funding was put into that. Western Heights is up here. So you're able to go in and see that. These will be continue to be updated on a project by project basis as I get that from whether it's Director Justice's team, Director DuBose's team. You're able to also see our pilot and TIFs on here. So that's these more geographically shaped centers here. So let's go with, let me have to refer to my own legend here. The yellows are the TIFs. So you're able to click on that, see more specific TIF information here, parcel IDs, end dates, the terms, that's all available there. You're able to see, usually a lot of these TIFs also have pilots adjacent to them, so pilot information. And then we also do have LIHTCs on here as well. So those existing or ongoing LIHTC projects, the Vista at Summit Hill is an example of this. You're able to see the location of that, how many affordable units were helped to be funded by that LIHTC grant. So again, before this, there was not a great way to, I also forgot, importantly, our homemakers projects are also on here. So you're able to go and see where each of these homemakers are plotted. As I was saying, before this, there was not really a great way to see in one place everything that the city has done in terms of housing. So this would be a great place to direct folks to be able to see that and broken down in that way. The last thing before I kick it back over to Director DuBose is that I understand that for a lot of these graphs, they're not necessarily intuitive, and they require some analysis that's not super easy. So if anyone ever has any questions, they can always just click on one of the titles. It will kick them over to, haven't come up with a super catchy name for this yet. I've just been calling it the Housing Data Inventory. but we do have a deeper dive on each of these graphs as well as some of the other ones that you've seen. So our population data is in here. We have some information around our housing inventory, owners versus renters, our housing stock, how that breaks down, costs of housing, our vacancy rates. These things continue to be throughout this larger housing data inventory. So again, another tool that provides some analysis, some deeper dives for folks who want to see it, but we did want to make sure that if anybody just wanted to see, hey, snapshot, overview picture, what are the data around our challenges with housing, and then what has the city been doing in terms of progress, they have this accessible to them. I will plug one more time, you can access this at www.knoxvilleTN.gov/housing-data.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I think we're almost finished with the presentation, but quickly, Councilman Parker and then Councilman Fugit.
A couple of quick questions. You shared what the Knoxville median income is. When plans are being made for use of, let's say, the city's Affordable Housing Development Fund, are we going by Knoxville median income or Knox County median income?
We're going by, what HUD uses, which is based on the metropolitan statistical area.
And why are we going by what HUD uses when it's our dollars?
Per our affordable housing ordinance.
So we need to update that ordinance.
Well, I think it's a good third party, I'm not sure income, it's provided to us by MSA. I'm not sure how to get that just for the city. But it would be, I hear your point, it would be a lot lower.
It's twice as much.
Right.
Right? So we're going into neighborhoods like Magnolia, and Ben Bentley comes before us and says, well, how'd you reach this number for 80% area median income? And we're just making numbers up, right? We're creating new markets. And that's, it's a pilot. There might be HUD money mixed in. Don't worry about that. But if we're talking specifically and strictly about the use of city dollars, we should be able to create a program that just looks at the incomes of Knoxville City residents.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that we don't conflate the projects that are getting tax incentives as the one that we're using
Right.
our affordable housing fund on.
Right.
Because our affordable housing fund monies are going to those 80% and below.
But
for
it's
the most-
80% of Knox County income.
Yeah, and the other thing that I want to point out is having that available to more people, particularly, all of these developments, for the most part, are serving very low and extremely low income. And, helping the most amount of people is important too. And so I think the way that it is gives opportunities to, if you're making $30,000, $45,000, and two people in a home are making $30,000, we don't want to, they're still hurting. They're still part of this crisis. We want to make sure that there are protections for them as well.
Are we being timed?
Yeah, you got 2 minutes.
Okay. I have another question and then a concern. With the dashboard, are we tracking pilots that we currently have in place for affordable housing and when they're going to expire?
Yes, those are represented when you click on the information.
So it's not just projects that have gone into place since 2019?
All active pilots are represented.
Okay, thank you. The concern that I wanted to raise is we've gotten new language tonight. We've gotten new definitions. For me, it's been confusing, and I think it's so important for us to get all on the same page. Even going through this and hearing about projects, knowing that you're using the Knox County median income and then getting to the dashboard and we're looking at Knoxville median income. it's a bit frustrating because this is the public-facing thing. If the housing is being developed and the community knows that they can't afford it. And they see more and more housing being developed and they know can't afford it. So it's up to us to figure out why are we got all these incentives in place, we got all these programs in place, but we still are not, even the affordable housing that we're producing isn't really affordable for the Knoxville community. And so that's why I'm asking these questions. And if you know, I'm someone who often makes under $50,000. My salary fluctuates, but for the most part, I'm at under $50,000. So I identify with our neighbors all throughout the city who can't afford this city anymore. I understand that. Even I make $50,000 with 2 incomes, one in city council. And that's what a lot of people are doing, working multiple jobs, trying to make a menial wage that's not even middle class, it's not comfortable, it's just enough to get by. And we keep prioritizing these higher income wage earners, it feels like, at least, because that's the developments I see popping up in Knoxville. I cannot afford them. Nothing that we've approved, okay? So that's why I'm asking you these hard questions. It may make sense on paper. Oh, we're doing this, we're doing that, it's great, but what's being produced is housing that people can't afford.
Councilwoman Fugit.
2 things. First, thank you for the dashboard. We've been wanting something like this, and I know it was a heavy lift, and we push you a lot, so when we get what we ask for, thank you. This is wonderful. I know the city's wanted it too, but I do want to give kudos. This is something that we know we've needed, and it was a heavy lift, and I appreciate that got done. Kind of piggybacking on what Councilwoman Parker said, I think, if I may, try to explain part of the issue with the area median, not Knoxville median, is that area median is easily found. It is industry standard. And part of the issue with how much lower end affordable housing that is difficult to develop is because we'll make a lot less of it, because it will take all government money, because you can't get financing for the private developer if there is not also more market rate rent to handle the borrower's note. I mean, these developments, somebody's borrowed money to do them. Unless we're going to put in all government dollars, that's the other yin and the yang. And so I think the strategy has been build as much as we can, serve as many people as we can, and maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong, but that's the why, because the financing piece for the private sector has to have enough revenues to support the debt in order for a bank to make them a loan. If the government does it, it's purely government subsidized housing. Maybe we need more vouchers, but that's HUD. But I'm just saying, I think that's really some of the math issue.
Thank you. You want to take us home?
Yeah.
Thank you.
A little 1-minute conclusion here, just to put a bow on everything and conclude our conversation. Please know that we're making quality affordable housing at a rate this city has never seen. For example, the 2 photos there, one is taken in 1938 when Austin Homes was built, and today, the first creek of Austin, in 38, there was 1 building permit that created College Homes and Western Heights and Austin Homes. There was 600 units. And you think about how large of an impact those developments had. and compared to 2,377 units happening here on our watch right now, we're doing it at a rate unprecedented. Next slide. We're building more permanent supportive housing than ever before. Next slide. And we're leveraging the private sector to launch catalytic, game-changing mixed-income communities. Thank you for your time. This was a very lengthy, robust presentation and conversation, and I appreciate your time and attention, and we're available for more questions.
Thank you, Director DuBose, and thank you for everybody that presented. We know a lot of information and time and energy went into this because this is complex. There's a lot going on, we need to understand every angle. So thank you for everybody that put the energy into that. Now we'll have a little bit of discussion of council. Councilwoman Fugit, we'll go with you first, and then Councilwoman Ryder. Oh, she was quick. Councilwoman Ryder.
Yeah, so one of the slides was, it said, well, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not sure this matters which slide it is, but it's the 5th slide, and it says Attainable Housing Challenge. 884 units, average number of housing units built between, per year, 2011 to 2022. 667 average number of multifamily units built. So it's kind of this is how many units were built each year. 177 average number of single-family homes built during that 10-year time frame. That's an accounting of new coming on units. But there's no slide to account for number of units lost. So is that a way, I'll let you answer in just a second, but is that something to look at in the dashboard, as we're looking at new units coming on? Is there a way to account for units being lost? Because there's always houses that are demoed because of age and condition and people's desire to, their whatever list of reasons they got rid of them. And number 2, that was one of the things we asked for with the missing middle housing. So I'll let you go ahead and answer
Thank you.
to that.
If you go to the next slide, I think our, right after, there you go. You
So if
see
I
it?
go to the one with the big blue
So,
circles.
during that same period, we lost 1,600 units. And so we do have that information.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, okay, gotcha. 1,600 total. All right. Oh, it's the one above. It's the
Yeah.
one above. Okay.
Yeah. And the answer is yes, we can, as soon as that's available, put that on the
As a layer
dashboard.
on the
Yeah,
dashboard.
We had a challenge of not putting too much information on there. My first draft of that was kind of, hard to get your arms around, but I do agree that's an important statistic.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Councilman Roberto. Oh, Councilwoman Fugit.
Thank you. I did remember what I was going to say. The other thing I left out about the MSA is because HUD requires, if you use HUD funding, you have to base it on the MSA. So if we don't want any HUD money in a project, we could make up our own, but that's why the ordinance was written that way back when I was on the committee working on the ordinance. So I didn't mean to get choked up, but that was my
That's correct. We're bound to using the MSA for, our federal programs, yes.
Councilmember Roberto.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Director DuBose, first, thank you for the presentation and the information you and your team assembled. Really appreciate the time you've put into. It's obvious the amount of time that was put into putting this together. There's a lot of elements here that I would want to talk about, but I think I'm not going to stand between everyone and dinner that much longer. I did want to highlight one in particular thing you mentioned, which was the Homemakers program. Great program. I think the idea of having a phase 2 of that, where you're looking at non-residential properties, I think is fantastic. As we start to turn more of our focus towards the corridors, that's going to be, I think, an important tool to have in your toolbox. Keeping in mind that in order to do that, you're probably going to need some significant funding in there out of the budget to be able to look at that kind of thing. It's also my understanding that what's going on currently with the Homemakers program is you're actually making money on what you're dealing with. Now, the intent is not to make money, but because of the market pressures, when you're doing this, the program is actually funding itself. I think you might see the same thing if you started to do commercial. I also have no idea, because I don't have a clock, I have no idea how much time I have left, so I'm going to quickly move to my final point. If our ultimate goal is going to be to access all of the opportunity that's along our corridors, and I think it is, we've talked about that a lot. You guys even talked about it. My colleagues are talking about it as well. I think what we learned tonight is, I think in the past, it may have worked to have people come to you. And I think it's great that people do want to come to you. But you need to go out and educate people about the opportunities that exist along the corridors, about your incentives. I don't think you need to be afraid to go and talk to people. You can talk to the chamber, you can talk to the realtors, you can involve them in that same process. I understand the hesitation was maybe at some point has been folks aren't going to be very receptive to somebody from the city coming in and saying, hey, we see a problem here, because maybe there'd be some threatening issue there. I don't think it has to be threatening at all. It's educational. And I would implore you not to make it threatening at all. It should be bringing in other community partners with you while you're going through that process and talking to them and educating them. There may be people who don't realize that there is A, significant demand for what could be transformative along the corridors, and B, programs that already exist that can help them achieve that. And I think we're not going to be able to fully access the opportunities there unless we go out and educate folks about what it is. So that was my little statement. Thank you.
Councilmember Thomas.
Yes, I'd already turned my light on, and Councilperson Roberto pretty much said most of what I wanted to say. But I did want to emphasize that the corridors, excuse me, it's hard enough to not lose my train of thought. The state of the corridors are totally unacceptable. It's been going on for decades. It's not anything this particular group did. But it's got to the point where it's so obvious, it's the big elephant in the room. Everybody's talking about it. And you don't have to do a complete study just to walk up or drive up and down the corridors, and it's obvious. There's all this underused space there. We've got a housing crisis, and we're not able to somehow start utilizing this. And we are stuck, I think, in an old paradigm. And it's the way that we've done it in the past. And Councilman Roberto talked about it a lot, but we've got to be more proactive. And maybe we need a workshop or a roundtable with the developers and get really focused and double down, as the mayor said a couple of weeks ago, and dig into this and find out from the developers what are the reasons they're not doing it. There's a little bit of a lag because the zoning code relatively recently didn't allow housing on the corridors, but now it does. But it doesn't seem like there's that kind of activity to take advantage of that. So it's, I guess, I got the feeling tonight that we didn't have much zeal for exploring that, and we really need to. Maybe that's unfair, but that's where the opportunity lies. So anything we can do to figure out why these blighted areas are not being developed and do whatever creative that we haven't been doing in the past is really, I think, where we need to focus.
Thank you. Councilwoman Ryder.
Yeah, I don't mean to sound like a broken record with my colleagues over there. I think if we just started with the vacant properties, I can sit here right now, if you guys want to take your pen and pencil out, and I can just sit here and slam you with addresses on Broadway. Charlie and I could tag team it, because Broadway Corridor Task Force, that's why it started. We couldn't figure out why nobody would invest in those properties, but they were putting beer all up and down Central. I did find out from an architect after I got on council, probably close to the end of my first 4 years, why people won't develop things on Broadway versus Central. If you had a choice to go to Central or Broadway, you'd pick Central, and the same's gonna be for Chapman Highway. And it was because, and in fact, I got a text message about it today. Lauren, do you know anybody at TDOT that we could talk to? No, I don't have any friends at TDOT that I could talk to about the cool thing you wanna do that their regs are keeping from happening. So people don't, or I should say developers, people with money, are challenged by doing things with the TDOT regs. And so it's like we have all the cards stacked against us for people to develop those things. And then we have all these out-of-county people, you know, and with a lot of the Broadway ones that hold these properties because they're waiting for their $1 million, $2 million plus windfall. One of them right now is getting a little bit of money because it's a laydown yard for KUB or TDOT one doing stuff on Broadway. But I don't know. You know, we had the meetings with Broadway Corridor Task Force with Mayor O'Hara, and that group started, I think, 2012. So here we are, 2024, 14 years later. Charlie was there. That's why I'm looking at him, because we were there together. And most of those properties haven't changed a lick in that 12-year time frame. Nothing has happened. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We changed the code. Still nothing has happened because they're held by people, which, I mean, we could send somebody to knock on their doors and they still probably might not do something because the cards are stacked against it. And also the majority of those properties are in the floodplain. So if we sit around and wait for somebody to do something, it's just not happening. And so anyway, we had the public meeting, kind of the visioning charrette process at St. James Episcopal, I think it was. And I know the one particular property owner that's waiting for his windfall, he came in the door, and when he sat down and found out there wasn't a discussion about how he was going to get a free handout, he got up and left. Some of them stayed, but again, little to nothing has changed. A handful have changed. It's like, I'm not asking for eminent domain. I don't think that's what my colleagues are asking for either. It's just we have got to get an aggressive strategy with these properties that have so much stacked against them. They're in a floodplain. They've got TDOT regs to go, as well as our own local. I mean, I'm literally gonna die of old age before I see some of these properties having, I'm not joking though, I'm serious as a heart attack. I'm like literally gonna be jumping up, down, clapping my hands. And I'm not talking to you guys or blaming you guys, but I'm like, if we're not aggressive, I'll be 76 years old, average age of everyone who dies in my family, and nothing will have happened. Sorry, I'm counting down. All right, that's all I have to say. I'm all for being aggressive with these properties because we put years into Broadway Corridor Task Force. We tried to be inventive. We tried to be creative. We did a design charrette. We did visioning. We did all this stuff to ask them to come to the table, and they're just like, nothing. So we're not going to see anything.
Thank you. Speaking of counting down, I'm going to try to get 3 or 4 comments or questions in my one brief kind of 5-minute spell here. The dashboard's great. Thank you, Mr. Hall. I think as we talked about development services, I think a similar dashboard would be helpful for developers to see metrics. Everybody's working as hard as they can, but I think measurable metrics on a public-facing screen of how many permits, how long it takes, those types of things. I think we discussed that in our retreat earlier this week, and I think a similar dashboard would be very helpful. Second comment is around the NOAA model, I'm really happy to see that you reference greater than 5 units, that we're not just talking 30, 40, 50-plus unit facilities, neighborhood commercial areas, or little pocket villages, or little corners of neighborhoods have small apartments where the NOAA model can be applied, and I think those people don't want to be displaced any more than people that live in apartment units of 100 or more. So really excited about scaling that down as low as we can. The one thing about the dashboard, and just generally speaking, and Mr. Hall, we spoke about this earlier today, the mayor outlined so many units per year for the next so many years that we need to build. There's a 541, I think, number was used, and so those are all kind of forward-looking numbers. I think as we aim for that, I think, excuse me, what I still lack, or maybe haven't put my eyes on correctly, is how many units are we behind now?
Yeah.
So understanding forecast of how many people are going to come here. I'm looking back on slide 10, Mr. Hall, if you would be so kind to go back to the chart in the dashboard. It's the screenshot of the dashboard columns of by income type, the green and the blue, deficit surplus. So if I were just generally public, how many units are we behind now? You could answer that a number of ways, but we obviously have an answer for how many we need to build to keep ahead. Is this what we should look at by income in terms of how many units we're behind? I know this is not availability, this is total units. Is that the right way to look at this?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So the 8,000 number, the 6,000 to 8,000 that we want to get done in the next 5 years, based on 3 factors. Our projected growth, that number's 541. Some level of loss, through demolitions and, structures falling into disrepair. And then, what our perceived gap is in terms of units. Now, our vacancy rate has fallen a bit recently from 99% to 96%. Where how we kind of come up with that other number is trying to figure out what number would bring us back toward affordability. And so, working with Knox Planning and Terry Gahula, we estimate that to be 4,000 to 5,000. And if we had that right now, it would drive the numbers back to where we traditionally have been. And so that number, that 4,000 to 5,000, plus 5 times 541, plus, some expected loss is how we got to the 6,000 to 8,000 per year.
By 2029?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would just maybe ask, or for you to consider, is that we put that goal on the dashboard so that we all kind of know what we're aiming at. So whether it's, 8,000, 6,000, or 541, if it's kind of too hard to say where we are now, like, we know the goal apparently, so let's put it up there and watch it for the next 5 years, or march towards it. I say that to say what we all know, which is we need more, but it's hard to kind of advocate or feel like we're doing well if we don't know how much more. And we know it comes in all shapes from the presentation today, but how much more? I think Councilwoman Parker's comment around by income type, aiming towards the bottom, gets a little bit to that. But I would ask just for, we're going to have a goal, let's put it up there and aim towards it and make it visual that we can track. And I think, with 20 seconds or less, I may be tying together too many things here, but I can't remember if it was Director Ball who mentioned the CAT continual poverty grant. So tell me if I'm tying the wrong things together, but that seems like an opportunity to use that with the intentional spotlight on the Burlington Magnolia corridor that has transit needs, to use grant funding from that. And what I hear is the Magnolia Burlington corridor is the spotlight that was shined on downtown, is the spotlight that was shined on South Waterfront. This is the next spotlight that's being shown there. But can we weave in the CAT grant into that as kind of the next big corridor effort?
So I think the short answer is that maybe. I think we would all like to see that happen. The purpose of this grant, I want to be very clear that I am not the expert on this grant, but it's my understanding that the intent is to go through a strategic process of identifying the best opportunities in proximity to transit, which naturally, what you're referencing and that Magnolia corridor it seems like a natural fit, but we would be going through that actual
Okay.
process.
All right, seems to make sense, given the priority of that corridor.
Yes.
We know there's a transit need on there. To
Correct.
double down on that one, that's where the, okay. Councilwoman Parker.
I wanted to continue pushing. I mean, it seems like the city's plan is to track this broad goal for how many new housing units we need over the next 5-6 years. And perhaps the Office on Housing Stability, still don't really know your office name, sorry. Is that it? Was that it? Okay, cool. Is going to come up with a strategic plan for permanent supportive housing, transitional, all these other pieces. But to me, that's what's missing, is for us to be able to track our progress. Like when we talk about permanent supportive housing, the last number I saw from Sean Griffith's report was we needed 500 and something permanent supportive housing units. So have we really gotten halfway there, or has that number shifted now? Has the need grown? That's the type of tracking I want to have a better sense of, so I know where to put my support. And when it comes to some vulnerable populations, we have some very specific categories of housing needs. And then on top of that, there are the various income categories. That's what I'm trying to understand in terms of the city's plans and the city's efforts, where you're prioritizing your energy. Because some projects are going to be easier than others. Some projects are going to be less controversial than others. And it can be an easy mistake that we make where we think, as long as we're moving forward, as long as we're developing housing, it's fine. But we're not prioritizing some vulnerable populations who then, there's no housing that ultimately trickles down to them, because the type of housing that they typically need doesn't naturally occur in the marketplace. You know what I mean? So we have to be more strategic with those. That's what I'm looking for. Will we see that level of detail at any time in this dashboard?
Yeah, we're going to track affordable housing units as well. We have that 2,000 goal moving forward. I also would say, and I'm a little bit out of my league here, so I'm looking at Ben, but we're looking at it locally in terms of how we select projects. We're trying to evaluate the ones that are going to give us the biggest bang and help the folks greatest in need. But also, there's a review at THDA, and the priorities are given toward permanent supportive housing and those who benefit the very low income. So by the time a project makes it, it's going to have several reviews, and those projects that are the best are going to rise to the top. Would you disagree with that, Ben?
No, I think that's right. Looking at the amount of units you're leveraging, particularly by income range and also geography, I think it's really important for us to be investing in HUD's words, what they would call high opportunity areas, areas that haven't historically had access to affordable housing. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to apply a more nuanced lens to evaluate some of those projects.
I have one more question. I thought I heard you say earlier that most of the affordable housing requires local dollars, or we use local dollars more for that end of the spectrum, whereas the federal dollars go more towards the workforce.
No.
Is that not what I heard? Okay.
No, so pretty much there are many tools available to those projects that benefit low and moderate income. So my federal money, or the city's federal money, not mine, the city's federal money has to go to benefit 80% and below.
Right.
Now, for the most part, it's very low and low income.
Right.
And in addition to that, we've restricted the Affordable Housing Fund to do the same thing. So, you know, you got two very powerful tools
At the
that
low
are
end.
addressing
Okay.
affordable housing in its traditional sense. We have to go the incentive route and these other levers to make sure there are protections for those in the workforce earning more than 80%, you know, and that's what I want to really be aggressive, you know, with the mayors leading in trying to help. And it's also a testament why we need housing at all levels. And it's gonna ease the competition for housing, you know, at the end.
Thank you. Any other questions? This continues to be the top priority for this council and one of the top priorities for this administration. We had a retreat on Monday and spent almost all of our priorities, whether it relates to general priorities or planning, had to do with housing. So we will continue the work. Thank you all. You all do the bulk of the work, most of the work, and we're grateful for it. So any other questions? This meeting is adjourned.